Welcome to the Holz Rubber Troubleshooting Training. In this segment, we will focus on how to troubleshoot a piping expansion joint. The first step is to determine the cause of failure. This can include cracking, atmospheric cracking, fatigue or flex cracking, blisters, metal reinforcement failure, dimensional failure, rubber deterioration, leakage, if it's not anchored properly, external cuts, and a full vacuum failure. If you can see the fabric reinforcements of the carcass, you need to replace the expansion joint as soon as possible. Due to the fabric being exposed, moisture is getting inside of the carcass and deteriorating the expansion joint. Over time, the cover of the expansion joint will slowly start to crack due to the climate conditions. You can repair minor cracks while the joint is installed with rubber cement. If you can see the carcass, the expansion joint needs to be replaced as soon as possible. Cracking where the carcass is exposed is usually caused by excess movements. It is important to use the correct elastomer such as EPDM for expansion joints that are exposed to the elements. You can also paint the cover with a CSM paint, which will protect it from UV and ozone. Expansion joints have a life cycle, and rubber is the best solution. However, over time and depending on the amount of movements, expansion joints will wear out. If the expansion joint is not designed for the movements and application, it will cause cracking. If you notice an external cut, plan on replacing the expansion joint during your next outage. If you can see the carcass, replace the expansion joint as soon as possible. If there are blisters or deformations on the cover of the expansion joint, they might not affect the performance of the expansion joint. If a major blister or deformation exists with ply separations, or you can see the carcass, you need to replace the expansion joint as soon as possible. If the metal of the expansion joint is visible through the cover, you need to replace the expansion joint as soon as possible. Verify the dimensions to ensure the new expansion joint is designed for the application. When you are inspecting an expansion joint, verify the face-to-face is accurate and there are no piping misalignments. If the existing joint is incorrect, contact us to help choose the properly designed product. If the expansion joint feels soft or gummy, you need to replace the expansion joint as soon as possible. If the expansion joint is leaking from the surface, replace the expansion joint as soon as possible. If the expansion joint is leaking from the flanges, verify the bolts are torqued accurately per specification. If the expansion joint is still leaking, remove the expansion joint and inspect the flanges for damage or debris. Verify the expansion joint is not overextended. It tends to pull the expansion joint's flanges away from the mating flanges. If the expansion joint is still leaking, you need to replace it as soon as possible. If the expansion joint is still leaking, remove it and inspect the flange. Make sure it doesn't have a raised face or is damaged. Both will affect the seal. Since most times you cannot see the inside of an expansion joint, you should consider the following. If the expansion joint is over 5 years old and is in a critical service application, you should maintain a spare. If it is not a critical application, you should replace the expansion joint after 10 years. A control rod is an important assembly to keep the expansion joint from overextending or compressing beyond the design capabilities. The number of control rods vary by size. You can find a chart on our website or app. It is important to know if the application is rated for full vacuum. If so, the expansion joint must be rated for full vacuum or it will fail. The picture is an example of an expansion joint that failed in service as the vacuum exceeded the design parameters. Notice the collapsed arch. We hope that you have found this segment educational. For more information, please visit holzrubber.com.